Welcome to this special edition of the Leadership Talk Show. I'm your host, Victor Vogel. In this special edition, I want to discuss the presidency of the United States, a leadership role. I want to point out the importance of the president's leadership role. I want to discuss similarities between a privately owned company's CEO and the presidency. I want to follow up on the importance of ethics and morals and how they play in the president's leadership role. Finally, I want to show you some of the differences between a CEO role and the President of the United States role. Let's begin with the importance of the President's leadership role. As President of the United States, the President impacts not only the people of the United States, but peoples of other countries throughout the world. The President's spoken word can alter financial markets, events, and unite or divide citizens. Given the impact the President has all over the world, it's easy to see how ethics and morals play a role in the president's leadership approach. When someone starts a company and invests their resources, they feel an inherited right to control and manage that company to include how it will be led. A CEO of a private corporation has absolute power, except for certain legal requirements under federal and state laws. As long as no laws are broken, the CEO has the right to treat employees the way they see fit. They set the company's culture. They hire, train, manage employee performance, and fire people as they choose within the laws governing employees like EEOC and wage and hour laws. They can make as much money as they want and not share any of it with employees, or they can share some of their earnings with employees. They can set the policies for employee treatment and termination. They can establish high ethical and moral standards or not. As long as they don't violate any federal laws, employees have little or no recourse to make changes outside of leaving the company. Employees who must have a job, who actually need a job, often feel trapped in a company who mistreats them and does not operate ethically or morally. The point is, the balance of power in a privately owned company is weighted heavily in favor of the CEO versus the employee. It is obvious the CEO of a private company is not an influential and service role. It's a directing and controlling role. Contrasting the presidency of the United States to a CEO, we find the president does not own the country. The people who elect the president are not employees. The president does not have absolute power, but rather is counterbalanced by two other segments of government, Congress and the judicial system. The president is elected to temporarily lead the executive branch of the government. They don't own it. The president does have the power to fire those in the executive branch, but it's somewhat constrained by policy and procedures established by the Constitution and the government. The president is responsible for setting the government's agenda and influencing Congress to support the agenda. The president does not have the ability to hire or fire members of Congress, but does have the power to nominate judicial positions, which have to be confirmed by Congress. The president is much more constrained, but can, through coercive leadership, create an environment where government employees in the executive branch will actually resign, much like employees in a private company resign when mistreated. The president is an influential role. as opposed to a controlling role. The presidency has far less control over employees. Because the role of the presidency is influential, both within the United States and the world, ethics and morals are more critical in creating a cooperative environment where government employees and other world leaders will desire to participate in a partnership with the president. Unlike the CEO of a company who can remain in the position forever, the president is limited to only 8 years at the most and 4 years minimally. The presidency also is limited by the power of Congress to override decisions. If the Congress is controlled by by the opposing party, then the president is less likely to get his agenda completed unless he or she gains the trust of the majority of Congress and is influential in changing their mind. The president has no authority over allies or other world leaders. The president has limited abilities to coerce foreign leaders. When it comes to ethics and morals, a privately owned company CEO does have to run his company, or actually does not have to run his company ethically or morally to be successful. Now, obviously, a lot of research says they will benefit more from having an ethical and moral approach to business and their workforce. But because their role is seen more as directing and controlling, they can choose to focus on ethics and morals or not. The presidency relies almost entirely on influencing people, whether it's the executive staff, Congress, the judicial system, or other governments, or the voting population. So having a strong set of ethics and morals that appeal to a wide variety of people and cultures would prove very beneficial in convincing others to follow the president's lead. It certainly is understandable that a CEO of a privately owned corporation who is elected as president with a mandate to change how the government works would find it difficult and struggle under the government's constitutional process while leading the government. President Trump built his business as a directing and controlling CEO. Now he's in a position that is more of an influential and collegial role as president. He comes to the position virtually with no background to help him make the transition from a controlling person to an influential leader. If you add the fact that his poor ethics and morals are topics of consistent public scrutiny, you can imagine why this has had an impact on his ability to get much of his agenda started, let alone completed. Since this is an election year where the Congress could move from Republican control to Democratic control, the president's effectiveness could be greatly diminished, particularly since he has not been able to become influential with all of Congress. In fact, he's chosen not to. President Trump's core values are questionable when it comes to infidelity, views towards women, and racial views. His frequent lies, which have actually been verified as lies through tweets and inconsistencies on video, along with his approach to firing his staff and how he does that, all give cause for concern about the president's ethics. So now, why should we be concerned about this? If you're in the executive branch of the government, there's an oath you take to uphold and abide by ethics policy within the executive branch. Let me take a second and show you this policy. Let me share my screen with you for a moment. Okay, this is actually the standards of ethical conduct for employees of the executive branch. As you can see here, there's a lot of stuff in here: general provisions, policies and ethics about gifts, accepting gifts, outside sources, employees, conflicting financial interest, impartiality in performing official duties, seeking other employment, misuse of position, outside activities. And all of these are detailed, very detailed in what you can and cannot do within this particular policy. Everyone in the executive branch is required to take the oath to abide by these rules, except for the president and the vice president. These two positions in government are not held to the same ethical standards as the people who work for them, with the exception stated in the Constitution Emolument Clause, which focuses on receiving gifts from foreign entities. So the president's role is basically influential and lacks the power to coerce people into following him. If he or she wants to get their agenda passed, they have to do it by influencing others to follow them. But they are not accountable for their ethical or moral behavior. Influence develops trust. Trust is built on solid values, ethics, and morals. Consequently, we have a gridlock in our government. We're divided and we appear chaotic to our allies and enemies in the world. So the only resource for coping with a president who is voted into office but behaves in an unethical and immoral manner is to vote them out unless they commit a criminal act like President Nixon did. I believe that many people are frustrated by how our government works. It requires cooperation, negotiations, and compromise to accomplish anything. This actually takes more time than a CEO issuing a directive to his employees. When you have a divergent agendas, it is difficult to move forward when the president is not influential and tries to be directive without absolute power. So people wanted change. They wanted things to happen faster or differently, but most people really don't know the Constitution put in place safeguards to prevent tearing down the government, which has protected our freedom and democratic society for over 200 years. Cannot lead the government like a private owned business. You cannot be the president of the United States and throw out all the values that establish the ethics and morals which have made us the greatest nation in the world. You cannot lead in a manner where the means justify the end and honor our Constitution. You cannot lead by appealing only to a small minority of the population. You must realize you represent all Americans. You have to humble yourself under the weight of the presidency and become a servant, not a CEO. It is a service role, not a director's role. If the leader who is elected president cannot make the proper transition from CEO to a service mindset, they will destroy trust, create chaos, and divide our nation. That is where we are today. The only possible way to change the situation is to neutralize the president by voting in a Congress that can override his decisions and voting in a new president who has a service mentality. excuse me, and who leads through influence and builds trust by instilling compassion, consistency, competency, congruity, and integrity into the role of the president, whether Republican, Democrat, or independent. Never believe your vote does not make a difference. We have seen it does make a difference. The only way to change our situation is to vote in those people who want to sustain our core values as a nation and are concerned about the well-being of everyone in America, not just a few. Thanks for watching this special edition of the Leadership Talk Show. I'm Victor Vogel. Please get out and vote.